Hello, everyone, and welcome to Application Development with ASP.NET with your host, Mr. Nelson LeKay. Nelson!
Hey.
Hey. And also joining us, we've got Mr. Zach Parrish.
Hello.
And myself, Jason Busby. Now, this is episode 10, and we're going to pick up where we left off for the last video where we were taking a closer look at AutoFact and talking about some of the other features we were going to be taking advantage of in the reimplementation of the foundation of our project management system. In this video, we're going to need to revisit in Hibernate because we're going to move away from XML mappings into the wonderful world of Fluent in Hibernate so that we can do our mappings from within C# itself and also take advantage of AutoMapping. So, Nelson, with that, let me go ahead and just hand it on over to you.
All right, yeah, like Jason said, Fluent and Hibernate, all it does is provides another interface for us to do mappings on top of and Hibernate. So, yeah, I guess we can go ahead and grab Fluent off of NuGet, or just go to, I can't remember the URL, I'll just Google Fluent and Hibernate and you'll find their site. Yes. And then Fluent and Hibernate will also bring in Hibernate 3 as well as Antler, IESI collections, and Link, and the Castle bytecode dynamic proxy doohickey instead of linfoo. And so, yeah, so first I'm going to go ahead and set up Hibernate as we would normally. So we start with a configuration object. That's going to bring in nhibernate.config, and then we tell our configuration object to configure itself, which will search for the nhibernate configuration in our application config file. Then we build a session factory with config.build session factory, and then we open up a session. Now at this point it's actually not going to compile because we haven't specified any configuration that is going to be read in as part of config.configure. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to use the application.config file, which is synonymous with the web.config when we're working with a website. So go ahead and add an application configuration file, and we can start putting in our configuration. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the Hibernate configuration section declaration, and that's going to go in the config sections element, and it's just going to look like that. And then at this point we can now start our Hibernate configuration. And then we can specify one or more properties, but the required properties I would just have to specify are the connection.driver class. This specifies which database driver that MySQL or Hibernate is going to be using. In this case, we're going to be using the MySQL data driver as opposed to the SQL Server or Oracle or whatever. The next thing we have to specify is the dialect, and the dialect's really cool because it's what Hibernate uses to generate SQL. So basically, Hibernate comes up with an internal representation of the query you want to run, and then it hands it off to the dialect. The dialect then takes that and turns it into a database-specific form of SQL, and that's because every single SQL server, or every single server that supports SQL in some way is different. Even different between versions. Like, for example, there's difference between the MySQL dialect and the MySQL 5 dialect, as well as there's many differences between the MS-SQL 2000, 2005, and 2008 dialects. The next thing we have to specify is the proxy factory. And right now we're using the Castle proxy factory, which was brought in by the NuGet package. So that's going to be nhibernate.bytecode.castle.proxy factory, and then we have to specify a assembly, which is it's going to be in the nhibernate.bytecode.castle assembly, as you can see right there. The next step is the final step is to specify our connection string. And we have two options for this. We have the connection string name and the connection string. The difference being that being that if we specified a connection string right here, the actual connection string would go right here. But if we specify a connection string name instead, it'll use it as a reference to our connection string property in our configuration file, which is a .NET. It's a pretty standard way to specify connection strings in .NET. So that's why I'm going to use the connection string name property. I'm going to add a named connection string called default, and then I'm going to specify the connection string here, which is going to be database equals 1 underscore ASP.NET video, ASP.NET. That's something.
We always try to remember to write this down before the videos.
ASP.NET dev, ASP dev net.
I think that's right.
It's one.
Yeah, one ASP.NET dev.
ASP. No, web dev ASP.
Yeah, nobody can guess it right. That's like the worst name ever. We should just like change it to Marshmallow or something.
Yeah. So then we're going to specify our server with, not service, server, which is going to be localhost, then our user ID, which is going to be root, and our password, which is, I think, video demo 1.
Yeah. Now, before you leave away from app.config, I just wanted to let anyone know that may be coming into this series new, that we have covered all of this in a previous video. Mm-hmm. So if some of the first lines that Nelson just pasted in quickly and moved right on to talking about the next thing that he's typing in, if in case you're confused, you can back up to the episode where we spent a bit of time talking about just the regular in Hibernate.
Yeah.
Well, so far, what we've done so far is just regular in Hibernate.
Absolutely. That's why I'm just letting everyone know that if they're coming in new, they can back up, or we spent more time talking about some of that stuff.
Okay, so yeah, if you remember from the previous video, at this point, Hibernate's now configured with the proper database and database connection, and we can verify that by running it and not actually. No, this probably won't open up a connection to the database, so that proved nothing other than we have no syntax errors. But at this point, we have everything configured, but we have a problem because we don't have any entities that we're mapping. So I guess the first step is to actually create the entities that we'll want to map, and then we'll go and actually use Fluent and Hibernate to map these instead of our normal mappings. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce a component here because that's another thing you need to know how to map with. Really need to figure out a more interesting example, because I've typed this code in so many times. Okay, so the person has an ID and he has a name. And I'm just going to do one person for now, and we'll show collections in a second here.
Yeah.
So at this point, we now need to get Fluent and Hibernate to map our stuff for us, or at least allow us to map stuff in a different way. And you do this by creating another configuration object. And you access the fluently static class, and you do fluently.configure, and then you either pass in nothing, which will start configuring a connection from scratch, or we can start from an existing Hibernate configuration object. And the existing Hibernate configuration object can include its own mappings or configuration, like what you saw we did here. We are using the app.config. If we were not using an existing configuration object, we could specify the stuff we specified in app.config in code, but I don't prefer to do it like that. So now we have our Fluent config object, and to use this, we have to now build our session factory from this new Fluent config object. And we have still accomplished nothing because We haven't told Fluent and Hibernate where to look for our mappings, nor have we actually made any mappings. So to do that, we do the fluent config .mappings method, which takes an action of mapping configuration. I'm just going to do mappings, and then I'm going to open up on a multi-line, and now we can do mappings dot. We can do AutoMappings, Fluent mappings, or HBM mappings. We're doing Fluent mappings dot, and now we can add from assembly or add a mapping manually. And a mapping in Fluent and Hibernate is just a class that extends the class map generic class that's provided by Fluent and Hibernate. We're going to do add from assembly of and pass in program. And this will essentially add every single class that we have in this assembly that extends from class map, and I'll add that as mappings. Okay, so the next step is to actually create the mappings that will be automatically picked up by this line right here. And we can go ahead and do that right here. We can do this anywhere in the project. So we can do a person map and have it extend class map of type person. And I just brought in Fluent and Hibernate.mappings and console application 1.entities. And all the mappings for Fluent and Hibernate go inside the constructor. So at this point, this is pretty much what would be turn into this in HBM. It would be class name equals person map. And that's what we've defined so far. So the next step is to go ahead and define the ID. And if you remember, what we want to define is we want to define ID name equals ID generator class equals identity. So this is the HBM that we want to generate, and to do that we just type in the ID method and pass in an expression that points to our property, and then do dot and say generated by identity. And most Fluent and Hibernate calls follow this sort of convention where we invoke some sort of method that's provided to us by the class map class, and then we pass in an expression that points to our property. Remember, this is actually an expression. This isn't a delegate. You can see right there, it's an expression. Fluent and Hibernate will never actually execute this code. It'll just use it to find what property we're selecting, I guess you could say. So the next step is we want to map that. If you remember, a person has a name, and the name has to be mapped as a component because he's a value object under this entity. And if you remember from the other video, it would normally look like component name equals name, property name equals first name, and then so on, and then end component. So to do this in Fluent and Hibernate, we start with the component mapping. We pass in an expression that points to our component to map, and then we pass in another multi-line lambda expression thing that actually tells Fluent and Hibernate what to do with our component. And the m parameter is what we're going to be using to say things about this component. So we'll do m.map. Map turns into property. So whenever you see something.map, we're declaring a property, so we do m.map. And then we can't do m again because m is in this scope, so let's just do n, I don't know, n for name or something. And then we have to map each individual last name. So there we go. This is essentially what. Actually, I'm going to take this and I'm going to bring it up here. It's blue. And so this is essentially what most Fluent mappings look like. We can also do a bunch of different stuff. We can do table, for example. Table is going to overwrite the table name, but we're not going to do that right now because it's going to default to the entity name, which is person. We can also do the same thing with all of these mappings. Like, for example, when we map these properties, we can do dot column and then pass in a different column name. These are generally really useful when we're mapping against legacy databases. So now that our session factory has been created, our mappings have been set. Remember, this automatically looks for every single class map that we have in this assembly, which this is one of them. We can now start working with our entities. And it's also important to know that Fluent config, that's what we're building the session factory out of, not the normal configuration. So I can actually do this. This is what you'll normally see me do, just to not make the mistake of accidentally referencing this config. Inside of the configure method, I'll just pass in new configuration.configure. Makes it look a little bit cleaner anyway. So that accomplishes the same thing without that config object laying around. So at this point, we can now do stuff like open up a new transaction. And saving out our entities.
Now, do we want to take a look inside the database, make sure there's no data in there at the moment?
Yep. I'm actually gonna. How do you start an arbitrary SQL script?
You mean just over there on the SQL query, you can just start typing.
I want to drop that, and then I want to delete from person, and I want to run this, and I don't have any idea how to do that.
Put a, yeah.
No database selected. Ugh.
Hang on. Well, no, just just come over here. There you go.
This is way too complicated. Disable safe mode. You gotta be kidding me. Fine. Oh, it's empty anyway.
It is empty.
Okay. Okay, so it is empty, and now when we go ahead and run this, well, first obviously we have to commit our transaction. We can go ahead and run this, and we hopefully won't get any errors. And we do, because person didn't get picked up, because I didn't declare the class map as public. Which is another unfortunate thing about these about Fluent, is that you have to have all your class maps as public, which is dumb, unless we added them explicitly, which is boring. So now we ran that, so we should see a person, and we do. So we see that it properly mapped everything just fine.
Cool.
So Zach, do you have any questions about Fluent so far?
Not so far, no.
It's looking very straightforward. I think one of the things that I know we've talked about it in the past, but if you jump back over to person class real quick, I think it'd be really good to show them. We've gone over how important it is to include virtual, but if you don't, if you leave it off by accident, go ahead and talk about that.
Well, in a web app, you will see a nice exception that'll say you forgot to add virtual, and it'll be great, and everyone will be happy. But if you're in a console app, you have to be in a console app. You have to configure Fluent and Hibernate with an existing and Hibernate configuration, and you forget virtual. You'll get this exception dialog that says database was not configured through database method, and you can't click on view detail to see if there was an inner exception.
Was that some anger I heard there?
I heard serious anger issues right there.
And you really need that view details to be active so that you can find out that you forgot virtual.
So is that a bug?
I would say so. I've never seen view details being grayed out before. It might just be localized to Jason's computer. It might be a bug in 2010. I don't know. It just, if you ever see database was not configured through database method and you know that is being configured properly, make sure that virtual, all of your members on all of your entities are virtual.
They have to be.
That was bad.
I hear the sound of experience with that.
Yeah. So yeah, associations. Associations are pretty straightforward with Fluent. Let's go ahead and create an address, and then we're just going to do a line 1, line 2 sort of thing because I'm too lazy. And yes, I know.
Good man.
Yay.
Okay, so now we have an address, and we want to associate, we want people to own addresses. So we're going to give him a public virtual iList, which is in system collections generic, and then of addresses, and then we want to actually, just to make this nicer, I'm going to go ahead and say private set, and then we're going to initialize our addresses member in the constructor. And the only reason that we have to do this is because the first time we create a person, addresses would be null if we hadn't initialized it previously. So we would get an exception if we created a person and added addresses in the same transaction. This just makes that not happen. So yeah, so now we go ahead and map our address class. With an ID, MID, generated by assigned. Line 1. Okay, and then to map the relationship between these two people, we now have to use the hasMany method. And again, we're just going to follow the same scheme where we're going to point Fluent to what property has many of. And then we're going to do dot cascade all delete orphan, which, again, I know we briefly said it in the last video, but cascade all delete orphan conceptually says that the person entity now owns addresses, and if a address was to be disassociated with the person, that address should be deleted because he no longer has any meaning.
Exactly.
So cascade delete orphan, yeah, that's what you would want to do. Also, well, that's the delete orphan part. The all part specifies that whenever we update whenever we save a person, we want in Hibernate to see if we changed any of his addresses, and then save those addresses too.
Likewise,
so
if we delete. Likewise, if we delete a person, all of their addresses will go away too.
Right. So yeah, so there's our address map, and now we can go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and alias this out into a variable, and then do person.addresses.add new address. Line 1. Line 2 there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and run this, but we're going to get an error. Hopefully.
Yay.
Cannot retrieve snapshot. I don't know. SQL likes to throw random errors at you. The reason we're getting an error here... Well,
sorry, it was just funny.
That's great. Just random errors. And marshmallow footballs.
The weirdest things I've ever seen have come out of ADO.NET. So what this means right here is that we don't have a address table in our database. I actually deleted that on purpose previously. We no longer have an address table, so how do we map to the address table? And while we do development with the project we're doing, like I've said so many times, I don't care about databases. They're just a thing that I put data in, and the less I have to think about them, like the happier I am. So we're going to instruct in Hibernate to do something really cool for us. We're going to instruct in Hibernate to, every time that we create a new session factory, we're going to instruct in Hibernate to look at the database, see if any tables, any columns, anything needs to be added, and then add them. The update flag specifies that only non-destructive operations are allowed, such as adding columns or adding tables. No delete tables or alter columns will be executed. Those we'll have to do manually, but this will handle most of the time. Most of the time, as we just add additional entities, we want the tables to be automatically created, but we don't want it to delete tables that have already been created. So now by specifying that, I can go ahead and hit run. It should just work without any errors. Yep. And if we look in the database, we will now see that we have an addresses
Very cool.
table.
Awesome.
And that you see that it already has everything. This person ID came out of nowhere because we had never mapped it. That was a result of the has many. And another quick thing that we need to know how to do with Fluent is how do we export the mappings so that we can look at them as they are, so that we can make sure that Fluent isn't doing anything dumb. We want to look at the mappings that it's been generating for us. And doing that's really straightforward. I'm going to go ahead and create a path variable where I'm going to stick the folder of where I'm dumping. Going to dump the mappings, and that's going to be at domain.current domain.base directory.
Now that did just add system.io, didn't it?
Yeah, I added system.io, and I think I added system as well.
Okay.
And then we're going to do if not directory exists path, then directory.create directory path, and then mappings.fluent export to path. Now if we go ahead and run this, and look in our folder, our bin folder, debug, mappings, we see that we have these two mappings. So if we open up person, we'll see that Fluent and Hibernate properly figured everything out for us. And this is a great debugging tool to make sure that nothing dumb is happening. So yeah.
Very nice.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else in Fluent that I need to talk about besides AutoMappings.
I think you've just about hit everything we're going to need.
Yeah, I mean, it seems fairly straightforward.
You've done the manual mappings.
Yep.
You've showed how to allow it to create the tables for you. Yeah, now auto mappings, and I think that's everything.
Alrighty, so auto mappings are pretty cool because even this is more code than we want to deal with, especially when we have the understanding that the database should always be it should always be the second thing you worry about. The first thing always should be the classes that you make, and so we want to go ahead and delete these two mapping files and have it work the exact same way. So to do that, we have to do mappings.automappings, and what you're about to see is an example of why I personally don't like Fluent stuff. Fluent's actually a thing that it's kind of like it's not really a design pattern. It's more of a API design, and it's this new sort of fad. You saw Fluent style map things with AutoFac, which worked out really well, but the Fluent style mappings with Fluent and Hibernate get so incredibly convoluted and awful, and what you're about to see is probably going to make you vomit.
Oh, well, that's
Well,
exciting.
at least you gave our audience a warning.
Yeah, pause, go get
Grab a
something.
bag.
Yeah, grab a bag, and let's get rolling.
Okay, so we're automapping add. We're automapping assembly of program, and then we need to pass in an AutoMapper conventions, or we have the opportunity to pass in an AutoMapper conventions somewhere in here. I think it's this guy. Yeah, AutoMapper configuration. So we need to instruct AutoMapper on what conventions to use when automapping our assembly, because obviously it can't figure out everything for us, so we need to tell it kind of what's up. So we'll create an auto AutoMapper conventions class and have it extend the default AutoMapper conventions, or configuration, sorry. And at this point, we can now override a bunch of different members to tell AutoMapper what it should do with particular classes. We'll leave this empty for now. And then we'll pass it into this overload. And yeah, that's going to get really wide. So at this point, this should really be all you need. But unfortunately, there's one other thing you need. But the thing is when you start to try to override the conventions, that's when it becomes really gnarly. But the only thing you really need is the should map type on the AutoMapper conventions, and this is going to every single type it finds in this assembly, it's going to ask us if we should map it. So I'm just going to go ahead and say I'm just going to say return type dot namespace ends with dot entities. So this will go ahead and automatically map all of our entities. And then I'm also going to do this. I'm going to say mappings automappings dot export to. Let's go ahead and see what it does with our stuff. What kind of mappings it generates by default. We get a weird error. Probably because virtual. Okay, so to debug this, we go ahead and because the error is it's trying to map something that shouldn't map. So let's go ahead and use our awesome debugging skills to find out what it's trying to do. So the type that we're working with right now is the address, which should be mapped. Good. And then did I hit F5 properly? And now we're working with, what am I doing? We're working with person, which should be mapped. Now we're working with a name, which shouldn't be mapped. So let's go ahead and ask the immediate window what the result of this expression is, which should be false. Good. Okay, so to debug this even further, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this in a try-catch. So we're doing an I session factory, and I just brought in an Hibernate dot something up there. But that's not important. You shouldn't. Unfortunately, like we said before, the view details doesn't work properly. So I'm going to catch the exception myself, and I'm just going to print out console.writeLine ex.toString. And then this needs to be initialized to null. There we go. And then we'll do console.readKey and see what we end up with. Invalid or incomplete. We need to go one step above that and do the ex.inner exception, which I'm sure is filled out. It's just Visual Studio is deciding not to display that for whatever reason. An association with the table person refers to an unmapped class name. Ah, yes. This is my bad. I totally forgot. The funny thing is like I said before, Fluent and Hibernate or AutoMappers aren't intelligent enough to pick up on actually a surprisingly large amount of instances. One of those instances being whether or not an object is an entity or a component. So you see that we are public virtual name. AutoMapper is thinking that this name is another entity, and it's trying to create a has-one relationship between a person and a name. But obviously name isn't an entity, he's a component. So we have to tell AutoMapper how to figure out if an object is a component or a type or an entity. So we'll override another one called isComponent. And then I'm going to go ahead and just say is component return type dot namespace ends with value objects. So everything under the value objects namespace will now be a component. Okay, this error is actually because the another thing that AutoMapper, I actually was expecting this, so don't think less of me.
Best line ever.
Awesome.
The reason is that AutoMapper doesn't know how to know if this association should be cascade all delete orphan. And because it's not all delete orphan, we cannot save addresses to a person that hasn't been already saved, and that was the error that we just got. So now we have to be able to instruct AutoMapper that some of our collections are going to be cascade all delete orphan, but not all of them. There's two ways to do it. The way that I'm going to do later on in the actual thing is I'm going to create an owns attribute. I'm going to say owns right here. And this owns attribute is going to be picked up by the AutoMapper conventions.
Wait.
Well, we could do it right. Nah, I'll just do it the other way, because the other way is also important. Sometimes we do need to just override what AutoMapper comes up with, and so to do that, we go down here and we say AutoMappers, and then so ugly. Dot overrides and mapping. Use overrides from assembly of program. So this use overrides from assembly of will tell AutoMapper to use anything that implements the I mapping override interface, or I AutoMapping override interface of type whatever. So just like our class maps, where we can specify fluently additional additional mapping information that we need for one's particular entity. So I'm going to do a person override right here and have him implement the I AutoMapping. It's good. I AutoMapping override, which brought in something. It brought in AutoMappings dot alterations. So person override that of type person. And so now we can implement his members, and now we can override the mappings of the person to do whatever we want to do, just like with Fluent. So we're just to do mappings, and then we're going to do has many, and then we're going to select out addresses, and we're going to say cascade.allDeleteOrphan. Okay, so at this point we now should have everything working properly. Of course, we still get an error because I didn't make that class public.
I'm glad you're getting the errors. These are excellent things for people that are new to working with this. See.
Okay, so now we get everything as we expected. We get could not insert to addresses, line 1, line 2. Actually, I think this duplicate...
Yeah, you've
yes.
got data in there and you're trying to put the same stuff in.
No, the issue is that it doesn't know how to find the ID.
I got you. Yeah, of course not, because all of the IDs are going to be unique anyways. Or supposed to be.
Well, we need to specify that we need to specify the generator
type
for all of our IDs. So to do that, now we have to start doing the ugly stuff that I warned about previously.
Well, hang on. You warned a second ago that what you were about to add was enough to make somebody vomit. So is this...
Well, this is actually what I was referring to.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
So now if you got that bag earlier...
Because I was afraid it was about to get even worse.
Well, that wasn't that bad, though.
No.
So.
No, this is bad.
Okay.
See, the problem is I have no idea how to format this that looks any... I've sat here... I have an AutoMapper configuration that's about... maybe 40 lines of this type of code, and I've sat there for like maybe 10 minutes trying to format it to make it look nice.
Seems like you had a just created a folder of mappings and just did all of your manual mappings there, it would just be so much easier to maintain.
Well, sure, but once you start working with more than, I don't know, like 20 entities, then you start getting to the point where it becomes incredibly, I don't know, annoying.
My only thought was, if you end up having overrides all over the place, and I don't know.
Well, yeah, true, but this is actually what we can do instead of overrides. We can add conventions.
Right.
See, we could do an override for person and address and specify the ID right here. We could do mapping .id, specify the ID, give it a generated by identity, or we could add a convention that does that for everybody.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
So the convention that we're going to be adding, and good luck finding documentation on this.
Oh, that's a challenge.
We want convention builder, and I just brought in something. I don't even know what
Conventions?
Sick.
Yeah, I don't know.
Help
See,
us.
the reason I don't worry about this is because Visual Studio has one built-in that works just fine. See, if I undo that to where this is no longer there, so I do convention builder, I do control dot, and that's built into Visual Studio. So if anyone's following along and they get somewhere where I hit Alt-Enter really quickly, you can just hit control dot and it'll do the same thing. So now we do convention builder dot ID when. Actually, we're not going to do when. We're going to do always, because we only have one type of ID right now, but that won't always be the case. And then I do this kind of. It was the only way for me to get it to look kind of nice. And then we pass in a lambda that specifies what additional properties we're going to be adding on this ID, and what we're going to be adding is generated by identity. So this will say basically all of our IDs are going to be generated by the identity generator. So if we go ahead and run, we'll finally have no errors, hopefully.
Or
we
not.
still get an error. Just line 1, line 2, select last insert ID. I'm actually going to go ahead and nuke these tables and have Auto or Fluent and Hibernate pick them up, because my theory right now is that AutoMapper added some different names for some of our columns. So I'm going to go ahead and nuke those guys and close that out.
You can't close that.
That's so annoying.
That's just your scratch pad.
And then run that, and then it'll generate the table as it sees fit, and it just works. So that was just an issue with the difference between how Fluent and how Auto decided how to build our tables. So we see now that we have a person ID, and all that stuff, and that's all good, and it's all
very cool.
Awesome. And you also see that the components, this is another cool thing, the components are actually going to be the fully qualified path to the component. So instead of, under normal circumstances, when you do a component mapping with the property, it'll just, the column that it'll make is going to be just that property. But with AutoMapper, it changes the name to be like the entire path to that property. So it includes the component name and then the property name. And this is really useful, especially when, like, for example, we have multiple names on the same row. It'll be properly disambiguated. So yeah, and we can also, again, because I did add the automappings.export2 path, we can go ahead and check out what AutoMapper came up with right here. So these are now AutoMapper's mappings. And it pretty much looks identical in every way. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to talk about GUIDs.
And an eerie silence filled the room.
Well, the issue is if we go ahead and add in MySQL data and our appender, MySQL data, and we also need our do you know where the NHProf assemblies are, Jason?
No.
MIZ.
There you go.
There we go. We need a log for net, and we also need the profile appender.
They're in the Z drive, dude.
Oh, thanks, Zach.
NHProf. Next time, just say the Hibernate profiler.
It took a second, didn't it?
It did,
Yeah.
because I was like, what is that?
What the hell is NHProf?
I'm sorry, Jace.
It's all good.
Okay. It's okay.
That one threw me for a loop. I didn't even know what it
Professor
was.
Who?
Okay, so we'll go ahead and initialize the connection, then we'll launch it, which should be on the desktop right here. And then go ahead and launch it. And we'll get an error. Error that we get is something. Oh, we have a lot of warnings. I don't know what those are about. Huh.
Missing a reference?
No, I'm pretty sure I have the reference right there. Hibernating Rhinos profiler appender. That was
Tried
like
to say it all in one word. That was like
that was
a
pretty
verbal collision.
I'm actually pretty sure what the issue is that we're on the client profile. Oh, how did that happen? We were on we were targeting 3.5 the whole time.
Wow.
Okay, so now we're on 4. It should just work. There we go. I have to set copy local to true on MySQL data. Which is annoying. You don't have to do that for the MSSQL version. Okay, so now we see that, so this is cool. We see the HPM2 DDL, and we're not getting any entities being saved. Which is unfortunate, because I really wanted to show the difference between identity and GUID. There we go. So now we have our insert into person, and, Okay, well, in MSSQL, there's no way to select out the last insert ID. So in this case, this is a bad example because it is already in the fewest SQL calls possible.
Mm-hmm.
But we are going to be using GUIDs in our project. The reason we're going to be using GUIDs instead of auto-incrementing IDs is so that we can kind of... It's sort of a design thing where we can basically tell our domain to do a bunch of stuff and then pass it. Like, for example, creating a user or something. You know, we can say, we can generate a new GUID in the controller, and then we can say, okay, user service, create user with this GUID, and then update the user details with this GUID, and then do all that stuff with this GUID, so that the domain server never has to really return anything back into the web app, which is what we want to accomplish. GUIDs also are good for things like sharding, but obviously we're not going to be doing that, where you have multiple IDs being generated on different things. But generally, I do prefer GUIDs. There is a slight performance decrease because GUIDs are, I believe they're 16. Are they 16 byte, Jason?
I do not remember. I just use them. I mean,
they're more than a integer, but on the other hand, they have way more values than an integer.
Right.
I think if you go to Wikipedia right now, I think it says something like there's like 2 trillion unique GUIDs per square centimeter of the Earth's volume.
it's something that's just absolutely insane.
Right.
So there's a few of them.
Yeah, and if you want to look at what GUIDs look like, we can go down to Tools, Great GUIDs, and these are what GUIDs look like. Actually, they look more like that when they're represented in Nibbles.
Nibbles and shards and...
Well, no, Nibbles. A nibble is a two hexadecimal digits representing a single byte.
Oh yeah, of course it is.
No, it's one hexadecimal digit because two nibbles are in a byte.
There you go.
That's how I always remember it. Okay, so to use GUIDs, basically all we have to do is now do GUID instead of ID. And then do GUID right there. Oh, I just went to full screen. And then we have to change the generator to GUID, but here's the problem. We still might want to use an integer ID somewhere in our application, and we always want those to be identity, but we always want our GUID IDs to be GUID, using the GUID generator instead of identity or assigned. We want to use GUID. So to do that, we have to change this convention. This is where it gets really nasty, where we have a when, and when is going to take in two delegates. One is going to be the condition, so it's going to be we're going to have to cast it into property info, which is a part of system.reflection, and then c.property. Oh no, it's c.expect. This is where it just goes downhill from here. So we have to cast something into a property info. What we're casting into a property info is going to be the i.property.member info, and then we're doing dot property type equals type of int, and then comma. So basically this huge convoluted line says that whenever we find an ID with the type of integer, give it an identity generator. And now we're going to do another one that's going to be pretty much exactly similar, except for we're going to be doing when the property type is a GUID, then generated by GUID. Okay, so the problem here, we have two problems. The first problem is the database currently is being stored in integers, the database ID. And if you remember, our DDL or HBM to DDL was told not to do any destructive updates, and changing the data type of a column is a destructive update, so it's not going to do it for us. The second problem has to do with a bug in the MySQL I don't know if it's the driver or the dialect, but something about it doesn't like GUIDs. I spent a while Googling around this issue where I would get this weird error. The error was, I can actually just show you the error because I can't remember what it's called, but you'll probably see this yourself if you're doing MySQL at one point or other. So it's
Is it
good to
not
know.
wanting to bring up the bottom?
Yeah.
Yeah, hang on. There you go.
Right, thanks. I'm going to go nuke these two tables so that we can regenerate them properly. Alternatively, I could have just altered the ID column to be a binary of 16. But I'm just going to drop them anyway, because I hate tables. And then we're going to go ahead and launch. It's going to work up to the point where we have to save the entity. Then it's going to throw us a nice exception that doesn't make any sense, which is going to be this right here, unexpected row count 0, expected 1. That's because I think it's the MySQL driver doesn't know how to work with GUIDs properly. But apparently at some point it did, because to get it to work, you have to do old GUIDs equals true.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Make this
Don't
work
ask me.
again equals true.
Yeah, pretty much.
So at this point,
Now it works.
That's awesome. That must have been added like in the feature list. We've got a new feature which breaks GUIDs.
Yeah, pretty much. So now that we see the IDs are being represented by blobs, they're binary. If you look at the data type, in MS SQL there is a unique identifier type which is a GUID, but unfortunately we're not on. What am I looking for? there. We're not on MS SQL, so we have to deal with the binary 16. Okay, so that's GUIDs. We're going to be using those a lot for our unique identifiers. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we need to talk about. I mean, Jason?
I can't think of anything. I'm surprised you got GUIDs in here, but that's great.
Yeah.
We can just start using them now. But I think that's everything.
Slick video.
Yeah, well, we can do one more thing. Just so we don't have to specify this anymore. If you want to go ahead and go ahead and add that.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and nuke this, and then we're going to create a attribute. I'm going to define it up here in a class. I'm going to call it the owns attribute.
Attributor?
Attributor. The attributor.
He extends attribute. He has attribute usage. He's only should be available on properties. And he doesn't have anything because he's just a flag, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
And then we nuked our I nuked it without saying it, but we nuked our person override class. And now we're going to add another convention. We're going to do convention builder dot has many when C. I don't know why I chose C. Expect. Okay, so this is going to be i.member.get custom attributes. Type of owns attribute. No inherit any. Comma. Indent that to make it look a little nicer, I guess. And then C dot cascade dot all delete orphan. And this is just kind of why I don't like this form of syntax, is because I had to spend so much time reading the non-existent documentation, basically just reading through code people have posted on Stack Overflow or Google Groups, and I finally hacked this together, and it's so not discoverable. Every piece of this is not discoverable, and that's why I just there's good examples of fluent interfaces, especially on AutoMapper and AutoFac and inject, and those are all good examples. But once you start getting into this weird convention builder thing, it starts getting like really annoying really, really quickly.
Well, it's because you're in the group of elite now, and
Exactly.
you should just know.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't know, then you're not much of a programmer,
Yeah,
really.
I mean, head on over to Stack Overflow and talk to the elites.
Bow down.
Okay, so now we can add our owns attribute, and that'll add the cascade all delete orphan. So everything will just work as it did before, but we didn't have to create that overrides class. Actually, there is an error, so I lied about that.
Well, unlie.
Well, let me look at what I did first.
All right.
C cascade has many when member. I don't know. This should work. Let's do this instead. Oh, we don't have a property. Of course we don't have a property. We have a member, which is exactly what I had before. What do we have? We have member, order by where. This is so nauseating. Member info. Ooh. No.
Well, talk a little. What are you thinking?
He's thinking,
thinking-
ooh, wait, ah.
Well, I'm thinking that I really dislike these things because, like I said, they're so not discoverable. I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just wish that it wasn't such a big fad these days, the whole...
You know how fashion is.
Here, let me try one more time. So we have a convention builder has many when expect member. It should just be member get custom attributes. Type of owns attributes false. Is any. What is that? Should just be any. Yeah, that was my fault. You guys didn't catch it.
You're right, we
I
didn't.
can't. I had is any there. Like, what is any? Where?
Don't
what
worry,
is
I will work harder to hold your little hand while you program in the future.
Oh,
Hold on. What is it? What is this? I've never seen this before. Who's this a part of?
No idea.
neither
Fluent and
neither have I, but you put it there, so I just had to.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I'm learning here. You know, let's all not forget this. This is all a new world for me too. So if you
Okay,
say
well,
it's so,
I
it's
just
so.
didn't want to make you look bad, so I
And,
just kept my
Zach,
mouth shut.
Zach's a pro on all this, but he
Yeah,
said,
exactly.
you know, if you don't have your elite card yet, and which means you're kind of like
I gotta
an
play
elitist in
incognito.
training,
Yeah.
and if someone has to hold your hand, there's no way you can get your elite card. So Zach's trying to, you know, be a brother and do the right thing. Don't process that. It's all good. I'm just playing with you.
Okay.
You caught it. It's working. Give him a minute to recover.
Breathe, yeah. Breathe slowly.
All right. Well, that's the incredibly convoluted land. Unfortunately, you only have to do this once.
Ever.
Yeah,
Let me
and
just
that is good.
copy it.
So let's just demonstrate what we can do now.
Okay.
Really quickly, we can go ahead and create a class called thing, and the thing has a. Let's give him a GUID ID.
Virtual.
Remember to put virtual in there, Nelson.
Just trying to help you out.
And let's say he has two names.
I got dibs on the next time he forgets.
All right. But if you tell him he can't get his card,
Okay. I'll keep my mouth shut then.
because I'm not part of the elite group, but you are.
All
So.
right.
And he has, I don't know, let's say he has a, no, let's just say he doesn't have any relationships. Because we're already relating everything like that. So anyway, so let's have this thing, and then let's go ahead and create a thing. And so that's all I did. I created a class thing, which is the cool part. Because I didn't have to do any mappings, I didn't have to do any schema updates, I didn't have to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And now I can just go ahead and save him out.
Your names are getting just better
I know.
and better.
It's like we go from lazy to something sub-lazy to absolute zero, no energy at all.
How can I press less keys?
Okay, so now we go ahead and run this. All we did was make a class, and we stored an object of that class into the database. And if we go look at our database now, we now have a thing database with
Things.
names.
Nice.
Oh, wait.
Wait.
Go back to that.
Uh-oh.
What?
So that was supposed to be just one long record?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I have the things, these are components. The names are components. They're not associations.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So we weren't looking for two separate entries on two different lines.
No.
Okay.
Because this is just a thing has two names for whatever reason.
Of course.
Because I wanted
No, I see it now. I see it.
Yeah. It's all good.
I wanted to demonstrate that you see that it because of the prefix of the component name
Yeah.
allows us to have two components with the same type.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
My brain wasn't watching closely, and it's just kind of weird to have two names and thing, but...
And of course, I was just like a
Thing.
yes man. Jason brings it up. I'm like, yeah, why not? Oh, wait, never mind. Oh, well.
Cool.
So yeah. Is there anything else that we need to talk about?
Fluent, we did manual mapping, we did auto mapping, we talked about GUIDs, and now we've talked about, well, the thing class. Really.
Nice job. Excellent recap. Yeah. So how are you feeling, Nelson, other than nauseated? I mean, are you feeling good enough that we now have got enough under our belt to move on with the coding now of the new foundation?
Hopefully. I imagine there will be questions from both Zach and other members that we'll have to address because some of the stuff that I have...
This new stuff from me, too.
Because I have some stuff planned out that...
We're going to disregard your questions.
Yeah, I know.
It's not going to be incredibly obvious to people. This isn't going to be an intro to web development. This is just going to be... This is how I would do it if I were given this task today. And if anybody has any questions, then we'll definitely spend more time on the individual things that people don't understand.
Awesome. That sounds good to me.
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and bring this interesting and fun video to a close. And with that, thanks a lot to all of our member sponsors out there, and for Nelson's time, for your time, Zach, and of course, all of the commentary that you threw in. Absolutely outstanding.
I haven't been kicked off yet. That's great.
And that wraps up this video. Bye, everyone.